Amahle was just 14 years old, full of dreams and light. She lived in a small town called Mutoko in Zimbabwe, and more than anything, she wanted to become a teacher. She loved helping others, and everyone said she was bright, kind, and full of promise. But when her father died, everything changed. Her mother remarried a man named Gacha, a man who wore a mask of care but carried only cruelty inside. One day, without warning, Gacha told Amahle she would no longer go to school. He said it was to protect her honor, but what he really wanted was control. That same day, he locked her in a small, dark back room of the house. No windows, no visitors, just silence. He told the neighbors she had gone to study abroad. Even her friends believed the lie. Amahle's world went from full of books and sunshine to four cold walls. She didn't understand why. She had done nothing wrong. Her heart broke with confusion and fear. Days passed, then weeks, then months, and still no one came for her. Outside, life moved on. Inside, she was forgotten, but she never stopped hoping. She held on to her dream of teaching, even if it was just to the shadows. She whispered lessons to herself. She imagined a classroom filled with smiling faces. Amahle was gone from the world, but not lost. Deep inside, a fire was still burning. She didn't know how or when, but she believed that one day the door would open again. For 7 long years, Amahle lived inside a small, dark room, more like a prison than a bedroom. There was no sunlight, no window, no mirror, not even a book to read, just 4 cracked walls and silence. The air was heavy and time felt frozen. Every morning felt like the one before, and every night felt like it would never end. She was only 14 when she was locked in, and year after year passed, but nothing changed. She had no calendar, no clock, nothing to tell her how long she had been inside. So she used her fingernails to scratch lines into the wall, one for each day. Over time, the wall was covered with thousands of tiny marks. That was her only way to keep track of life. Outside, her stepfather Gacha lied to everyone. He told the neighbors and family that Amahle had been sent to study overseas. He smiled, acted proud, and even showed fake letters to prove it. People believed him. No one came looking. No one knocked on the door. Amahle was alone, but her mind refused to give up. Inside that tiny space, she built a new world in her imagination. She turned the room into a classroom in her mind. Every day, she stood in front of her invisible students and gave quiet, imaginary lessons. She taught history, math, and reading. She even gave speeches in her head, pretending she was standing in front of a big crowd. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she whispered to herself, just to hear a voice. On the worst days, she pressed her ear to the door, hoping to hear a kind voice, footsteps, anything. But most days brought only silence and the sound of her own heartbeat. She started to forget what her face looked like. She hadn't seen a mirror in years. Her mother, Thandi, was in the same house, just a few feet away. Amahle could hear her cooking, walking, sometimes crying, but never opening the door. That hurt the most. Still, even in that darkness, Amahle held on to something powerful, hope. She didn't know how she would escape, but she believed, deep down, that her story wasn't finished yet. She didn't know that one day, her voice, the same one she used to whisper to the walls, would be heard by millions. She didn't know that behind those walls, she was becoming something unbreakable, a quiet warrior, a girl who would one day turn her pain into power. Amahle's mother, Thandi, lived just outside the door, the same door that kept her daughter locked away for years. Every day she passed by that room. She cooked meals, swept the floors, and laughed with her husband, but she never opened the door, not once. Sometimes, late at night, Amahle could hear her mother crying softly on the other side. The sound of quiet sobs would reach her through the cracks, and once in a while, Thandi would whisper, barely loud enough to hear, I'm so sorry. But the door stayed shut. Amahle would lie awake, staring into the dark, wondering why. Why didn't her own mother fight for her? Why didn't she say anything, tell someone, call for help? It hurt more than the cold floor, more than the hunger or the silence. The betrayal stung like a deep wound that wouldn't heal. Her mother wasn't gone. She was right there. And yet, Amahle felt more alone than ever. Thandi wasn't a bad person. She had once been warm, gentle, and loving. But after Amahle's father died, She married Gacha, a man who promised to take care of them, but instead brought fear and control. Thandi was afraid of losing her home, her comfort, her safety. Gacha made her believe that keeping Amahle locked away was the only way to protect their reputation, to avoid shame, to survive. And over time, Thandi stopped resisting. Amahle didn't hate her mother, but she couldn't understand how love could turn into silence. She couldn't understand how a mother's fear could be stronger than a mother's heart. Still, she didn't let it break her. In that room, with no one by her side, Amahle made herself a promise. She whispered it into the darkness like a prayer. One day, I'll walk out of here, and the world will know what happened to me. I won't stay silent, even if everyone else did. That promise kept her strong. It gave her something to hold on to when everything else was gone. Her mother's silence hurt her deeply, but it also lit a fire inside her, a fire that would not go out. Amahle didn't know when or how, but she knew one thing: this would not be the end of her story. One day, she would speak, and when she did, the world would listen, not just to her pain, but to her power. One morning, a new housemaid named Lindui arrived at the house. She was young, quiet, and trying to keep her job. But from the moment she walked in, she felt something was off. The house looked normal on the outside. Clean floors, nice furniture, smiling faces, but deep inside, something didn't feel right. There was a heavy silence that didn't match the neat rooms. As days passed, Lindiwe started hearing strange sounds, soft sobs, barely there whispers. They seemed to be coming from a locked door at the back of the house. It looked like any other door, but no one ever opened it. No one ever went near it. One day, she finally asked the other staff, "What's behind that door?" An older maid quickly pulled her aside and warned, "Don't ask, just don't go near it. That's the rule here." Lindiwe nodded, but the sound of crying kept echoing in her mind. She couldn't sleep. She kept wondering, who was behind that door? Why did it sound like someone was suffering? Her heart wouldn't let it go. She started slipping by the door during her cleaning, pausing to listen. And then, one day, she heard something that made her freeze. A voice. A real, soft, human voice whispering, "Help me." That moment changed everything. Lindui didn't know exactly what to do. She was scared. What if she lost her job? What if she was punished? But her conscience was louder than her fear. She had an old smartphone she barely used, and an idea came to her. That evening, when no one was watching, she wrapped the phone in a cloth and quietly slid it through the small food slot at the bottom of the locked door. Inside the room, Amahle stared at the phone like it was a gift from heaven. She hadn't touched anything electronic in years. Her hands shook as she held it. She didn't know how to use it at first. Her world had been stuck in time, but slowly she figured it out. That phone didn't open the door. It didn't give her freedom right away, but it gave her something even more powerful, a way to be heard, a way to tell the truth. She waited until the house was quiet. Then, holding the phone close, she pressed record and whispered into the camera, "My name is Amahle. I've been locked in this room for 7 years. Lindiwe had no idea what that one small act would start, but by trusting her heart, by choosing to help, she gave Amahle the first real chance at freedom. That phone became a voice, and that voice was about to shake the world. Late one night, when the house was silent and everyone was asleep, Amahle held the smartphone close to her face. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was beating fast. She had never used a phone before, never even seen herself in a camera, but she knew this was her chance. Maybe her only one. She pressed the record button, leaned in close and whispered, "My name is Amahle. I've been locked in this room for 7 years. Please, help me." Her voice was soft, but the truth in it was loud. She spoke into the darkness, not knowing who would listen, or if anyone would believe her. She sent the video to the one person she trusted, Lindiwe, the maid who had given her the phone. Lindiwe watched the video with tears running down her face. She didn't wait. She uploaded it online with the caption, "This girl has been hidden for 7 years in Mutoko. Please, someone help her." Within hours, the video started spreading, first in Zimbabwe, then across Africa, then the world. People were shocked, heartbroken, and furious. The video hit 1 million views, then 5 million, then 10. It was everywhere, on news channels, social media, and WhatsApp groups. Celebrities shared it. Activists spoke out. Everyone was asking the same question: who is Amahle, and is this real? The next morning, the once quiet street in Mutoko was crowded. Police cars pulled up. Reporters held cameras. Officials arrived with social workers and lawyers. People from NGOs who fought for girls' rights stood by with tears in their eyes. The house was surrounded, not by silence this time, but by voices calling for justice. Inside the room, Amahle heard the noise, the footsteps, the people shouting her name. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then came the sound she'd waited years for, keys turning in a lock. The door opened. Light rushed in. Amahle covered her eyes. She hadn't seen daylight in so long. Slowly, she stepped out. The cameras clicked. People gasped. She looked thin, pale and fragile, but there was something powerful in her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't hide. She stood straight and strong. The first thing she said, in a steady voice, was, "Don't feel sorry for me. Feel sorry for the next girl locked away like I was." In that moment, Amahle didn't just walk out of a room. She walked into history. Her voice had broken through the walls that held her for so long, and now the world was listening. When the door finally opened, Amahle didn't run. She didn't scream, and she didn't cry. She stepped out slowly, blinking in the sunlight she hadn't seen in 7 long years. Her feet touched the earth like it was something sacred. Her body was weak, but her spirit was strong. The crowd outside stood in silence, staring at this girl who had just come out of a nightmare. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. Officials stood still. Everyone waited to hear her speak. Amahle looked around, not afraid, not angry, just calm, steady. And then, with a voice clear and soft, she said, "Don't feel sorry for me. Feel sorry for the next girl locked like I was." Those words hit harder than any scream. People in the crowd wiped their eyes. Some clapped. Some simply stood frozen. In that one moment, Amahle turned from a victim into a voice. She wasn't begging for pity. She was demanding change. Her stepfather, Gacha, didn't say a word as the police took him away in handcuffs. For years he had lived like a king in that house, hiding his cruelty behind closed doors. Now the whole world knew who he really was. As he was led out, Thandi, Amahle's mother, collapsed to the ground. She fainted from shock, guilt, maybe even fear. Paramedics rushed to help her. Amahle looked in her direction but didn't move. Her face didn't change. The pain was there, yes, but there were no tears left. People tried to ask her questions, but Amahle said little. She looked up at the sky, breathed in the air, and just stood there, free for the first time in almost a decade. She was taken to a hospital where doctors checked her health. She was underweight and weak, but alive. When the nurse asked if she was scared, Amahle just smiled faintly and said, "I've already survived the worst. What comes next can only be better." News stations across Africa ran her story all day. The girl in the locked room. 7 years in silence. Amahle speaks. But Amahle didn't want to be just another headline. She wanted to be a beginning, not an ending. Even in the hospital bed, she asked for a notebook. She started writing down her thoughts, her plans, her dreams. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about others, about the girls still trapped in silence, the ones no one had found yet. She had been rescued, yes, but she wasn't broken. Amahle was ready to build something out of the pieces of her pain, something bigger than herself. She wasn't just walking into freedom, she was walking into purpose. 6 months after stepping out of that dark room, Amahle didn't disappear. She didn't hide from the world or try to forget her past. Instead, she did something powerful. She turned her pain into purpose. With the help of kind people, lawyers, and women's rights activists, Amahle launched her own organization. She named it the Unlocked Souls Foundation, a name that came straight from her heart. She said, "I was locked up for 7 years, but my soul was never trapped. Now, I want to help free others." At just 21, Amahle became a voice for every girl who had ever been silenced. Her foundation started small, just a rented office and a team of 5 volunteers. But her message was so strong, so real, that people from all over southern Africa began to listen. She started receiving calls from girls, from teachers, from neighbors who had seen signs of abuse and didn't know what to do. Amahle and her team went from town to town, rescuing girls who had been hidden, hurt, or forgotten. With every rescue, Amahle grew stronger. She built safe houses for them, gave them food, clothes, therapy, and, most importantly, love. Soon, her work reached the world stage. Amahle was invited to speak at global events. She stood in front of world leaders at the United Nations and told them her story. Her voice didn't shake. Her message was clear. No girl should ever be silenced again. She met presidents, ministers, and change makers. She wasn't there to take selfies or smile for photos. She was there to demand action. She asked governments to pass new laws to protect girls. She worked with police stations to make sure missing girls were taken seriously. At a TEDx event, she gave a powerful speech called "Walls Can't Kill Dreams." She spoke about the room she was locked in, how she turned it into a classroom in her mind, how she never gave up on the dream of becoming a teacher. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Some cried. All were inspired. Amahle could have chosen to live a quiet life. She could have left the past behind and moved on, but she didn't. She chose to go back, not into the pain, but into the fight. She knew there were still girls out there just like her, waiting, hoping, surviving, and she refused to leave them behind. Every time someone asked why she worked so hard, Amahle would smile gently and say, "Because I know what it feels like to be forgotten, and I will never let that happen to another girl if I can help it." She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She had become a savior, and her mission was only just beginning. It had been years since Amahle last saw her mother. In that time, Amahle had become a global name, the girl who had turned tragedy into change. She had rescued hundreds of girls, spoken at world stages, and built homes where love replaced fear. But one part of her past still lived quietly in the shadows: her mother. Then, one afternoon, at a large public event in Harare, something unexpected happened. Amahle was on stage, speaking about the newest safe house opening, when a soft murmur spread through the crowd. People began to turn and whisper. Down the aisle walked a woman, barefoot, tear-streaked, shaking. It was Thandi, her mother. The audience fell silent. Thandi looked older, smaller, broken in a way that went deeper than age. She fell to her knees in front of the stage, crying openly, her voice trembling as she said, "Amahle, my child, I'm sorry, please forgive me." Amahle looked down at the woman who had once stood outside her locked door and said nothing. Her face was calm, but her eyes filled with something deeper. Not anger, not hate, just sadness and strength. She stepped down from the stage slowly. The crowd held its breath. Amahle reached out and hugged her mother. The two of them stood there, holding each other, surrounded by silence. Thandi sobbed into her daughter's shoulder, repeating, "I'm sorry, I was weak. I didn't know how to protect you." After a long moment, Amahle gently pulled back, placed her hands on her mother's shoulders, and said words the whole world would remember. "I forgive you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But I cannot forget. What happened to me still happens to other girls. Right now, behind closed doors. My duty is to them now." Tears rolled down the faces of people in the crowd. Even reporters lowered their cameras. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Amahle walked back to the stage, tall and unshaken. She picked up the microphone and continued her speech like nothing had changed, but something had. In that moment, people didn't just see her as a survivor or a hero. They saw her heart. Forgiveness takes courage, but so does choosing your mission over your pain. Amahle didn't turn her back on her mother, but she also didn't let her past pull her away from her purpose. She knew that every minute spent looking back was a minute lost for another girl still trapped, still unheard. That day, Amahle showed the world that healing doesn't mean forgetting, and that true strength is when you stand tall, not just for yourself, but for those still waiting in the dark. Every girl Amahle rescued added more strength to her spirit. With each story of pain she heard, she didn't grow tired. She grew more determined. She had once been locked away in silence, but now her voice echoed across Africa, and it was changing everything. She didn't stop at rescue missions. Amahle knew that saving girls was just the first step. They needed more than freedom. They needed healing, safety, and a future. So she built safe houses where girls could sleep without fear, where they were hugged instead of hurt, where their stories were believed. She opened legal clinics where survivors could speak to lawyers and get justice. Many of the girls she rescued had never been inside a courtroom, but now they had people standing beside them, fighting for them because of Amahle. And then she went further. She built schools, places where girls who had been forgotten could now learn, dream, and lead. She hired teachers who understood trauma. She filled the classrooms with color, books, and hope. Girls who were once called broken were now writing poems, coding computers, and leading student councils. Her movement spread fast. Billboards with her face and her words appeared in Nairobi, Accra, Kigali, Lusaka. Cities across Africa began to know her name. The posters had her photo and her message. I was locked for 7 years. Now I unlock others. People were inspired not just by what she had been through, but by what she was building from it. Her pain had become her power. Her story became a sword, not to harm, but to cut through silence, shame, and fear. Governments started inviting her to help write new child protection laws. Schools asked her to speak to students. Police departments asked her to train their officers on how to handle abuse cases. She was no longer just surviving. She was leading a revolution of love, justice, and change. Whenever she walked into a room, people stood up, not because she asked them to, but because they felt something in her presence, something real. She had once been invisible. Now she made sure no girl ever would be again. But through all the praise, Amahle stayed grounded. She often said, "This is not about me. This is about the girl who's still waiting for help, right now, in some hidden room." She visited the safe houses often, sitting with the girls, listening to their stories, hugging them tightly. And whenever one of them asked if they could really dream again, she'd smile and say, "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to begin, like I did." Amahle's mission was no longer a dream. It was a movement, and it was changing thousands of lives. Today, the world knows her as the iron voice of Africa. But to Amahle, she's still just the girl who once talked to the walls and dreamed of being a teacher. The difference is, now her voice isn't trapped. It's powerful, and it's changing lives every single day. She didn't just escape a room. She rewrote her whole future. What was once trauma became triumph. What once brought her pain became the fire behind her purpose. She stood tall in places where leaders listened, and she spoke with honesty that shook hearts. She didn't beg for sympathy. She demanded change. Her life became more than a story. It became a film watched by millions, a best-selling book translated into 10 languages, and a symbol of revolution for girls across the world. People who had never heard of Mutoko now knew Amahle's name. Survivors in faraway countries wrote letters to her saying, "Your story saved me." When journalists asked her, "How did you survive such horror?" she never hesitated. She smiled gently and said, "I didn't survive. I transformed." And that's what makes Amahle different. She didn't let her past define her. She turned it into a mission that helps others rise. She showed the world that even the darkest rooms can't kill a dream, not when the soul inside refuses to be silent. Amahle didn't just break free. She broke through and became unstoppable.